March 3, 1944. 11:47 a.m. Major Gunther Rall stood in the operations room at Wiesbaden Air Base, 25 miles west of Frankfurt, watching the teletype machine clatter out the latest intelligence report from Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin. The message was brief. 8 words that made no sense. Twin-engine fighters escorting bombers. Altitude 27,000 feet. Approaching Frankfurt. Rall read it twice. Then he picked up the telephone and called the radar station at Darmstadt, 30 miles south. "Confirm the contact report," he said. "Twin-engine aircraft." The voice on the other end was a young lieutenant, probably 22 years old, nervous. "Yes, Herr Major. Multiple contacts. Twin-engine. Flying in pairs. They are with the bomber stream." "How many?" "At least 60, Herr Major. Maybe more. They're fast. Faster than anything we've seen before." Altitude. 27,000 feet. Some of them are climbing to 28,000. Rall hung up the phone. He walked to the window and looked east toward the Rhine. The sky was clear. Visibility was unlimited. In 30 minutes, those twin-engine contacts would be overhead. And Gunther Rall, with 250 confirmed kills, a veteran of the Eastern Front and the Mediterranean, a man who had fought in the skies over Stalingrad and Sicily, had no idea what they were. Twin-engine fighters didn't escort bombers into Germany. The math didn't work. Twin-engine aircraft were heavy, 12,000 pounds empty, sometimes more. They consumed fuel at twice the rate of single-engine fighters. Even with drop tanks, the maximum combat radius for a twin-engine fighter was maybe 400 miles. The distance from England to Frankfurt was 380 miles. Add in climb to altitude, combat time, reserves for landing, and the fuel requirements became impossible. But there they were. Rall had first heard rumors of American twin-engine fighters 3 months earlier, in December 1943. Intelligence reports from North Africa had described a Lockheed aircraft, designation P-38, operating with limited success against German and Italian forces. The reports had been dismissive. The P-38 was fast in a straight line but had poor maneuverability. It was vulnerable to coordinated attacks. German pilots in the Mediterranean had shot down dozens of them. But those P-38s had been operating over Tunisia and Sicily, flying from bases 100 miles from the front lines. These P-38s were flying over Germany, 600 miles from England. Something had changed. At 11:52 a.m., Rall called his squadron leaders together. There were 4 of them. Hauptmann Weiss, commanding 1st Staffel. Hauptmann Major, commanding 2nd Staffel. Oberleutnant Kruger, commanding 3rd Staffel. And Lieutenant Bader, acting commander of 4th Staffel after the previous commander had been killed over Schweinfurt in February. "Gentlemen," Rall said, pointing to the map on the wall. "American bombers approaching from the west. Approximately 300 B-17s. Current position 50 miles west of the Rhine. Speed 180 miles per hour. Altitude 25,000 feet. They will reach Frankfurt in 25 minutes. The officers nodded. Standard briefing. They had heard it 100 times before. But, Rall continued, they are escorted by twin-engine fighters. Type unknown. Altitude 27,000 to 28,000 feet. At least 60 aircraft, possibly more. The room went silent. Weiss spoke first. "Twin-engine fighters, Herr Major? From England. Confirmed by radar. Confirmed by visual sighting from forward observation posts." "That's impossible," Major said flatly. "Twin-engine aircraft don't have the range." "Apparently they do," Rall said. "We scramble in 10 minutes. Orders are to intercept the bombers before they reach Frankfurt. Engage the escorts only if necessary. Hit the bombers, break away, regroup at 15,000 feet. Standard tactics." But Rall knew, even as he gave the orders, that nothing about this was standard. At 12:03 p.m., Rall scrambled with 28 Bf-109 G6 from Jagdgeschwader 11. His aircraft, White 13, was a veteran machine. It had been with him for 7 months. The engine, a Daimler-Benz DB605A, produced 1,475 horsepower at sea level. At 25,000 feet, that dropped to approximately 1,100 horsepower. Top speed at altitude, 386 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 39,000 feet, though the aircraft handled poorly above 35,000. Armament, 120mm 151 cannon firing through the propeller hub, two 13mm 131 machine guns mounted above the engine. Good armament. Enough to destroy a B-17 with a single well-placed burst. But the guns were wing-mounted, which meant each weapon had a different trajectory. Convergence was set at 300 meters. Beyond that range, accuracy dropped significantly. Rall climbed through 15,000 feet, pushing his Bf-109 toward combat altitude. The engine was running smoothly. Oil temperature was normal. Coolant temperature was climbing slightly, but nothing unusual for a combat climb. Around him, his pilots formed up in loose pairs, Rotten, the basic fighting unit of the Luftwaffe. 2 aircraft. 1 leader, 1 wingman. The wingman's job was simple. Protect the leader's tail, watch for threats, call out enemy positions. Good pilots. Veterans, most of them. Men who had survived where others had not. Weiss had 45 kills. Major had 38. Kruger had 29. Even the youngest pilots in the formation had at least 10 confirmed victories. At 12:14 p.m., Rall reached 24,000 feet and spotted the bomber stream. 300 B-17 flying fortresses at 25,000 feet, flying in tight defensive boxes of 18 to 21 aircraft each. The formations were called combat boxes by the Americans, and they were designed for mutual fire support. Each B-17 had 13.50 caliber machine guns. In a box of 18 aircraft, that meant 234 machine guns, all aimed outward, creating a sphere of defensive fire that could shred any fighter that came too close. The bombers' contrails streamed behind them like white ribbons across the blue German sky, perfectly straight lines marking their course toward Frankfurt. And above them, weaving back and forth in wide, lazy turns at 27,000 feet, were the escorts. Twin-engine aircraft. Silver. Fast. Flying in formations of 4, line abreast, covering the bomber stream like a protective shield. Rall had never seen anything like them. The design was unconventional, almost alien. The nose was long and sleek, housing what appeared to be the cockpit in a central nacelle. But instead of a conventional fuselage extending back to a tail section, the aircraft had 2 booms, one on each side, each boom carrying an engine. The engines were Allison V1710s, liquid-cooled inline engines, each producing 1,600 horsepower. Between the booms, connecting them at the rear, was the tail section with twin vertical stabilizers. The configuration gave the aircraft a distinctive silhouette. From head-on, it looked like a strange, wide creature with twin engines spreading out like arms. From the side, it looked fast, predatory, purposeful. And they were everywhere. Rall counted at least 70 of them. Maybe 80. They were flying at 27,000 feet, 2,000 feet above the bombers, maintaining a speed of approximately 280 miles per hour. Fast enough to keep up with any attack, slow enough to conserve fuel. He keyed his radio. All aircraft, this is Adler leader. Identify the twin-engine escorts. Silence. Then one of his pilots, Feldwebel Kraus, a veteran with 31 kills, replied. Unknown type, Herr Major. American markings. White star on fuselage. Twin booms. Twin engines. Rall circled wide, staying 5,000 feet below the bombers, trying to assess the situation. The twin-engine fighters weren't attacking. They were just there, protecting the bombers. Flying combat air patrol at an altitude that should have been impossible for aircraft that size. Twin-engine fighters were supposed to be heavy. They were supposed to struggle at high altitude. The weight of 2 engines, 2 propellers, double the fuel system, double the cooling systems, all of that added up to an aircraft that couldn't climb, couldn't maneuver, couldn't fight at 27,000 feet. Except these could. He made a decision. He would test them. At 12:19 p.m., Rall led his formation in a climbing attack from the southwest, positioning his Bf-109s for a head-on pass against the lead bomber formation. The plan was simple. Close fast from 12 o'clock high, fire a 3-second burst from 800 yards, break down and away before the bomber gunners could track you. The head-on attack was the most effective tactic against B-17s because it exposed the aircraft's weakest defensive fire. Most of the guns were positioned to fire to the sides and rear. From the front, only 2 or 3 gunners could bring their weapons to bear. But to execute a head-on attack, you needed speed. You needed surprise. And you needed to avoid the escorts. Rall's Bf-109 accelerated to 420 miles per hour in the dive from 26,000 feet. The engine screamed. The airframe shook. At 800 yards, he would open fire. 3 seconds. Maybe 60 rounds from the 20mm cannon, 200 rounds from the machine guns. Aim for the cockpit, the engines, anywhere that would cause catastrophic damage. But the escorts reacted immediately. 8 of the twin-engine fighters rolled inverted and dove. Not straight down, but in a curving, high-speed descent that brought them directly into the path of Rall's attack. They were moving fast. Faster than any twin-engine fighter had a right to move. Rall estimated their dive speed at 450 miles per hour. Maybe more. And they were closing the distance rapidly. At 12:20 p.m., at 1,200 yards, the first P-38 opened fire. Rall saw the muzzle flashes in the nose, bright orange sparks against the silver fuselage. The P-38's armament was clustered in the nose. 120mm Hispano cannon, 4.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns. All 5 weapons fired along the same axis. No convergence issues. No need to calculate where the rounds would intersect. When a P-38 pilot aimed at a target, every bullet went exactly where he pointed. Oberfeldwebel Dietrich, flying 200 meters to Rall's left, took the burst. The rounds punched through his engine cowling. Black smoke poured from the Daimler-Benz DB605. His aircraft began losing power immediately. He radioed that he was returning to base. Rall pulled up hard, trying to regain altitude advantage. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. The Bf-109 groaned, the wings flexing under the stress. At 4 GS, he leveled off at 26,000 feet. The P-38s had already climbed back to 27,000 feet. They had given up their altitude advantage to defend the bombers, dove at 450 miles per hour, fired on the attacking German fighters, then climbed back to their patrol altitude without apparent effort. That should have been impossible. Twin-engine fighters were heavy. 17,500 pounds loaded for combat. They couldn't climb like that. They couldn't accelerate like that. They couldn't maintain that kind of altitude performance. Except these could. And Rall understood why. The engines weren't just Allison V1710s. They were turbo-supercharged Allison V1710s. Each engine had a General Electric Type B2 turbo-supercharger mounted in the tailboom, driven by exhaust gases from the engine. The turbo-supercharger compressed incoming air before it entered the engine, allowing the Allison to maintain 1,600 horsepower even at 25,000 feet, where normally aspirated engines gasped for oxygen. German engines didn't have turbo-superchargers. The Daimler-Benz DB605 had a single-stage, single-speed mechanical supercharger. At sea level, it produced 1,475 horsepower. At 25,000 feet, power dropped to 1,100 horsepower. The BMW 801 radial engine in the FW190 was even worse. It produced 1,700 horsepower at sea level, but only 1,200 horsepower at altitude. The P-38, with its turbo-supercharged engines, had a 400 horsepower advantage at 25,000 feet. That translated to a 30-mile-per-hour speed advantage and a climb rate that was nearly double that of the Bf-109. Rall couldn't outclimb them. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't out-accelerate them. At 12:24 p.m., Rall tried again. This time he approached from the north, using a cloud bank for cover. His plan was to pop up underneath the bombers, hit them from below where their defensive fire was weakest, then dive away before the escorts could respond. He climbed through the clouds at full throttle, the Daimler-Benz DB605 screaming at maximum RPM. His airspeed dropped to 180 miles per hour. The Bf-109 was hanging on its propeller, barely maintaining altitude. At 25,500 feet, he broke through the top of the cloud layer. Directly above him, 1,500 feet higher, were 6 P-38s. They had seen him. They were already rolling into their attack dive. Rall shoved the stick forward and dove. His airspeed built rapidly. 300 miles per hour. 350, 400. The Bf-109 was shaking, approaching its structural limits. He didn't care. He needed distance. He needed separation. The P-38s followed. They stayed with him, all the way down to 15,000 feet. Rall pulled up hard at 12,000 feet, bleeding off speed to avoid overshooting his altitude. He looked back. The P-38s had broken off and were climbing back to their patrol altitude. They hadn't pressed the attack. They had simply chased him away from the bombers. That was their mission. Protect the bombers. Don't get drawn into dogfights. Don't chase individual German fighters across the sky. Just keep them away from the B-17s. And it was working. At 12:31 p.m., Rall called off the attack. He had lost 2 pilots. Dietrich was limping back to Wiesbaden with a damaged engine. Lieutenant Becker had been shot down in flames near mines. A P-38 had caught him in a diving attack, hit his fuel tank with a burst of 20mm cannon fire, and Becker's Bf-109 had exploded in midair. No parachute. No chance. The bombers flew on, untouched, toward Frankfurt. Rall landed at Wiesbaden at 12:58 p.m. He climbed out of his cockpit and stood on the tarmac for a moment, watching the contrails fade in the eastern sky. Around him, ground crews were refueling and rearming the aircraft that had survived. Mechanics were already working on Dietrich's Bf-109, pulling the damaged engine cowling to assess the extent of the damage. Rall walked directly to the operations room. He needed to know what those aircraft were. He needed to know how the Americans had done it. He needed to understand what he was facing. The intelligence officer, Hauptmann Steiner, was waiting with a folder. He handed it to Rall without a word. Inside was a reconnaissance photograph, taken 3 weeks earlier by a Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft over England. The photo showed an American air base, probably somewhere in East Anglia. On the tarmac, clearly visible, were twin-engine fighters. Dozens of them, lined up in neat rows. The caption read, Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Twin-engine, single-seat fighter. First observed over North Africa, 1942. Range unknown. Performance characteristics unknown. Range unknown. Performance characteristics unknown. Those words told Rall everything he needed to know about how unprepared the Luftwaffe was for what was coming. Steiner pointed to a technical summary below the photograph. Lockheed P-38L Lightning. 2 Allison V1710-111-113 engines. 1,600 horsepower each. Turbo-supercharged. Counter-rotating propellers to eliminate torque. Top speed 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Cruise speed 290 miles per hour. Service ceiling 44,000 feet. Maximum range with drop tanks, approximately 1,300 miles. Combat radius, 600 miles. Armament, 120mm M2 cannon with 150 rounds, 4.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns with 500 rounds each, all mounted in the nose. Rall sat down heavily. He did the math in his head. If the P-38 had a maximum range of 1,300 miles, it could escort bombers from England to anywhere in Germany. The distance from England to Berlin was 580 miles. Round trip, 1,160 miles. Add in combat time, maneuvering, climbing to altitude, and the P-38 still had enough fuel with a comfortable reserve. How? Rall asked. How did they solve the range problem? Steiner pulled out another document, a captured American technical manual for the P-38L. Drop tanks, he said. External fuel tanks. 2 of them, mounted under the wings. 150 gallons each. Total of 300 gallons of additional fuel. The P-38 carries 410 gallons internally. With drop tanks, total fuel capacity is 710 gallons. At cruise speed, fuel consumption is approximately 100 gallons per hour. That gives them 7 hours of flight time. Rall stared at the numbers. 7 hours. The Bf-109G-6 carried 400 liters of fuel internally, approximately 105 gallons. At cruise speed, it consumed 95 liters per hour, about 25 gallons per hour. Maximum flight time, 4 hours. Combat radius, 350 miles. The P-38 could fly almost twice as far, stay aloft almost twice as long, and still have enough fuel to fight. When did they start escorting bombers? Rall asked. 3 days ago, Steiner said. March 1st. First confirmed sighting was over Cologne. They escorted bombers to Stuttgart yesterday. Today, Frankfurt. Tomorrow, probably deeper into Germany. How many do they have? Steiner opened another folder. The documents inside were stamped with red classification markings. American production reports, captured from a downed B-17 crew last month. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation has 2 factories. One in Burbank, California. One in Dallas, Texas. Combined production, approximately 350 P-38 Lightnings per month. Current estimates, based on reconnaissance photographs and captured aircrew interrogations, suggest the 8th Air Force has at least 400 P-38s operational in England. The 9th Air Force, also based in England, has another 200. The 15th Air Force in Italy has 150. Total, 750 P-38s in Europe. Rall looked at the numbers. 750 P-38s in Europe. And that was just one type of fighter. The Americans also had P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-40 Warhawks. The total American fighter force in Europe was somewhere around 2,000 aircraft. Germany was producing 1,200 fighters per month, all types combined. Bf-109s, FW-190s, Me-410s, everything. The Americans were producing 3,000 fighters per month. Just fighters. Not counting bombers, transport aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft, trainers. The math was hopeless. What about performance? Rall asked. Can we outfight them? Steiner turned to another page in the folder. Comparative performance analysis, based on combat reports and captured American documents. At 25,000 feet, the P-38L has a top speed of 414 miles per hour. The Bf-109G-6 has a top speed of 386 miles per hour. The FW-190A-8 has a top speed of 402 miles per hour. Advantage, P-38. He continued. Climb rate at 25,000 feet. P-38, 2,600 feet per minute. Bf-109G-6, 2,000 feet per minute. FW-190A-8, 1,800 feet per minute. Advantage, P-38. Service ceiling. P-38, 44,000 feet. Bf-109G-6, 39,000 feet. FW-190A-8, 37,000 feet. Advantage, P-38. Range. P-38, 1,300 miles. Bf-109G-6, 700 miles. FW-190A-8, 560 miles. Advantage, P-38. Steiner looked up from the documents. The only advantage we have is roll rate. The P-38 has relatively heavy ailerons. In a high-speed rolling maneuver, the Bf-109 and FW-190 can outroll the P-38. But that advantage is marginal and only applies in specific circumstances. Rall had seen that firsthand. The P-38 wasn't invincible. It had weaknesses. But those weaknesses didn't matter when the P-38s were flying in formations of 8, 12, 16 aircraft. When one P-38 engaged a German fighter, 2 more Dove to support. When a German pilot tried to exploit the P-38's slow roll rate, he found himself outnumbered 3-1. And the engines? Rall asked. 2 engines, Steiner said. Allison V-1710-111 on the left, V-1710-113 on the right. Counter-rotating propellers. The left engine turns clockwise, the right engine turns counterclockwise. This eliminates torque effects and makes the aircraft more stable in flight. He pointed to a diagram in the technical manual. If one engine is damaged, the pilot can shut it down, feather the propeller to reduce drag, and fly home on the other engine. The P-38 is designed to operate on a single engine. Maximum speed on one engine, approximately 240 miles per hour. Enough to return to base from deep inside Germany. Rall thought about his Bf-109. Single engine. Single propeller. If the Daimler-Benz DB605 was hit, you had 2 options. Bail out or try to glide to an emergency landing field. There was no backup. There was no second chance. If your engine stopped, you were coming down. The twin-engine configuration gave the P-38 survivability that no German single-engine fighter could match. American pilots shot up by German cannon fire could shut down the damaged engine, feather the propeller, and fly 600 miles back to England on the remaining engine. German pilots shot up by American machine guns had to bail out over enemy territory or crash land in hostile France. The implications were staggering. Every P-38 that limped home on one engine was a pilot who would fly again tomorrow. Every Bf-109 that went down was a pilot lost forever, either killed, captured, or wounded badly enough to be removed from combat duty for months. Steiner closed the folder. Herr Major, the P-38 represents a fundamental shift in American strategy. They are no longer trying to match us aircraft for aircraft. They are using their industrial capacity to build fighters that are simply better in every measurable way. Faster, longer range, more survivable, better armed. And they are producing them in quantities we cannot match. Rall stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the flight line. The surviving Bf-109s from the morning's mission were being serviced. Mechanics were patching bullet holes. Armorists were reloading ammunition belts. Ground crews were refueling aircraft from tanker trucks. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like business as usual. But it wasn't. How long? Rall asked quietly. How long can we sustain losses like this? Steiner didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Herr Major, if we lose 2 fighters per mission, and the Americans fly 1 mission per day, we will lose 60 fighters per month. Our production replaces 1,200 fighters per month across all fronts. The Eastern Front requires 400 fighters per month to sustain operations. Defense of the Reich requires 600 fighters per month. That leaves 200 fighters per month for losses, attrition, and reinforcement. If the Americans increase their sortie rate to 2 missions per day, we will lose 120 fighters per month. If they increase to 3 missions per day, 180 fighters per month. If current loss rates continue, we will reach a point where we cannot replace losses faster than they occur. That point, Herr Major, is approximately 8 weeks from now. 8 weeks. Rall let that sink in. By May 1944, the Luftwaffe would no longer be able to defend the Reich. Over the next 2 weeks, Rall flew 11 more missions against bomber raids escorted by P-38s. He learned their tactics. He learned their patterns. He learned how they operated. The P-38s flew in formations called Finger 4, named because the 4 aircraft were positioned like the tips of 4 fingers on an outstretched hand. The formation was flexible, allowing each pilot to cover his wingman while maintaining visual contact with the formation leader. It was superior to the German Rot, which used only 2 aircraft, because it provided better mutual support and more firepower in a single formation. The P-38s typically cruised at 27,000 to 28,000 feet, 2,000 to 3,000 feet above the bomber stream. This gave them an altitude advantage over any attacking German fighters. When German fighters approached, the P-38s would dive to intercept, using their altitude advantage to build up speed. They would make one high-speed pass, fire a burst, then climb back to their patrol altitude. If a P-38 pilot saw an opportunity, a German fighter isolated from his formation, he would engage. But the standing order was clear: protect the bombers. Don't chase individual kills. Don't get drawn away from the bomber stream. And it was devastatingly effective. On March 8th, Rall shot down his first P-38. He had waited for an isolated aircraft, a lone Lightning that had become separated from its formation during an engagement over Mannheim. The P-38 was flying at 23,000 feet, alone, heading west back toward Allied lines. Rall attacked from above and behind, using the sun for cover. He dove from 26,000 feet, building up speed to 450 miles per hour. At 400 yards, he opened fire. His 20mm cannon and two 13mm machine guns hammered the P-38's right engine. Rall saw pieces of the engine cowling fly off. Black smoke poured from the nacelle. But the American pilot didn't panic. He didn't attempt to bail out. He didn't try to fight back. He simply shut down the damaged engine, feathered the propeller to reduce drag, and dove away at 350 miles per hour. Rall tried to follow, but his Bf-109 was already low on fuel. The combat over Mannheim had consumed most of his reserves. He had maybe 10 minutes of flight time left. He broke off the attack and returned to Wiesbaden. Later that afternoon, intelligence reported that the P-38 had successfully landed at an Allied airfield in Belgium, near Liege. The pilot had flown 180 miles on one engine, crossed the front lines, navigated to the nearest friendly airfield, and brought his aircraft home. The damage was assessed as repairable. The aircraft would be back in service within a week. Rall's victory was confirmed. His kill count went up to 251. But the American pilot would be back in the air within days, flying a repaired or replacement P-38. That was the difference. When Rall shot down a P-38, he damaged one aircraft and inconvenienced one pilot. When an American pilot shot down a Bf-109, he killed or captured a German pilot who had taken 18 months to train and could never be replaced at current training rates. On March 17th, Rall flew a mission against a bomber raid targeting Munich. The raid consisted of 450 B-17s escorted by approximately 100 P-38s and 150 P-51 Mustangs. The Luftwaffe scrambled 140 fighters from bases across southern Germany. Bf-109s from JG-3, JG-11, and JG-53. FW-190s from JG-26 and JG-2. The engagement lasted 35 minutes. When it was over, the Germans had lost 28 fighters. The Americans had lost 6 bombers and 2 fighters. Rall shot down one B-17 and damaged another. But he also watched 12 of his pilots go down. Some bailed out. Some crashed. Some were simply never seen again, their aircraft disintegrating in mid-air under the concentrated fire of P-38 nose armament. One of the pilots killed that day was Hauptmann Weiss, commander of 1st Staffel, 45 confirmed kills. A veteran of the Battle of Britain. A recipient of the Knight's Cross. He was hit by a P-38 during a head-on attack against the bomber stream. His Bf-109 exploded. No parachute. Instant death. His replacement was Oberleutnant Schmidt, a 24-year-old pilot with 8 confirmed kills and 200 hours of combat time. A good pilot, but not a Hauptmann Weiss. By April 1944, the P-38 had become a symbol of something Rall couldn't fight. It represented American industrial power. The twin engines weren't just about performance or survivability. They were about showing the Germans that America could afford to put 2 1,600 horsepower engines on a single-seat fighter. They could afford to equip each one with a turbo supercharger that cost more than an entire Bf-109 engine. They could afford to build 10,000 of them. They could afford to lose 1,000 and still have 9,000 more. Germany couldn't build aircraft like that. The Bf-109 and FW-190 were brilliant designs, optimized for performance and simplicity. They were designed to be built quickly, with minimal resources, using manufacturing techniques that could be distributed across hundreds of small factories. They were designed for a nation that was resource-constrained, that had to make every kilogram of aluminum and every liter of fuel count. The P-38 was designed by a nation that had so much industrial capacity that efficiency didn't matter. It didn't matter that the P-38 required twice as much aluminum as a single-engine fighter. It didn't matter that it consumed twice as much fuel. America had infinite aluminum and infinite fuel. On April 22, 1944, Rall was shot down for the 8th time in his career. He was attacking a formation of B-17s over Munich when a P-38 hit his aircraft with a burst of .50 caliber fire from 800 yards. The rounds walked up his left wing, punched through the fuel tank, and hit the cockpit. His canopy shattered. His instrument panel exploded. Smoke filled the cockpit. Rall pulled the canopy release and bailed out at 19,000 feet. His parachute opened at 15,000 feet. He descended slowly, watching his Bf-109 spin down into a forest below. He landed hard in a field near Augsburg, 30 miles west of Munich. He broke his back on landing. 3 vertebrae fractured. He lay in the field for 20 minutes before German soldiers found him and carried him to a truck. He spent the next 6 months in a military hospital in Stuttgart. The doctors told him he would never fly again. But Rall was stubborn. He endured the surgeries, the rehabilitation, the physical therapy. By October 1944, he was walking again. By December, he had been cleared to return to flight status. When he returned to Wiesbaden in January 1945, everything had changed. The base was half empty. Most of the experienced pilots were dead. The aircraft were patched together from salvaged parts. Fuel was rationed so severely that pilots flew one sortie every 3 days, sometimes once per week. The P-38s were still there, but now they were joined by hundreds of P-51 Mustangs. The skies over Germany belonged to the Americans. The Luftwaffe was losing 20 to 30 pilots per day, every day, without pause. Replacement aircraft took weeks to arrive. Replacement pilots took months to train, and most of them were killed on their first or second mission. Rall flew 14 more missions between January and April 1945. He shot down 5 more American aircraft, bringing his total to 275 confirmed kills. He survived where others did not, using the same skills, the same tactics, the same situational awareness that had kept him alive since 1939. But the war around him was collapsing. On April 16, Soviet forces launched their final offensive against Berlin. On April 25, American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe River. On April 30, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker in Berlin. On May 7, Germany surrendered. Rall was captured by American forces near Salzburg, Austria, on May 8, 1945. He spent 8 months in a prisoner of war camp, then was released in January 1946. After the war, he was interviewed by American intelligence officers. They were interested in his combat experiences, his tactics, his assessment of German and Allied aircraft. They asked him about the P-38 specifically. When did you first encounter the P-38 over Germany? March 3, 1944. Over Frankfurt. What was your initial assessment? I thought it was impossible. Twin-engine fighters don't have the range to escort bombers from England to Germany. But there they were. How did the P-38 compare to German fighters? It was faster above 20,000 feet. Better climb rate. Better armament. More survivable because of the twin engines. Our only advantage was roll rate, and that didn't matter when they outnumbered us 3-1. When did you know Germany had lost the air war? The day I saw P-38s over Frankfurt. Not because the P-38 was the best fighter in the world. It wasn't. The FW-190 had heavier armament. The Bf-109 could outturn it in certain conditions. But the P-38 proved that America could afford to build anything, in any quantity, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Rall survived the war. He joined the West German Luftwaffe in 1956 when West Germany was permitted to rearm under NATO. He rose to the rank of General Leutnant, commanding German air forces during the Cold War. He retired in 1975 and lived until 2009, dying at the age of 91. In his memoirs, published in 1980, He wrote extensively about his experiences in World War II. An entire chapter was devoted to March 3, 1944, the day he first encountered P-38 Lightnings over Frankfurt. He wrote, "I knew in that moment that we had lost. Not because the P-38 was the best fighter in the world. It wasn't. But because the Americans could afford to build an aircraft with 2 engines, 2 turbosuperchargers, and enough fuel capacity to fly from England to Berlin and back. They could afford to equip it with 5 forward-firing guns, all mounted in the nose for maximum accuracy. They could afford to produce 10,000 of them and send them to Europe in vast formations that blackened the sky. We couldn't match that. We couldn't even come close. Our factories were bombed. Our resources were exhausted. Our pilots were dying faster than we could train replacements. And every day, more American aircraft appeared over Germany. P-38s, P-51s, P-47s, B-17s, B-24s, an endless stream of aircraft backed by an industrial capacity we simply could not comprehend. The war was no longer about courage or skill or tactical genius. It was about mathematics. And the mathematics were hopeless. The P-38 Lightning flew 130,000 combat sorties in Europe between 1942 and 1945. It shot down 1,771 German aircraft in air-to-air combat, more than any other American twin-engine fighter. It escorted bombers on every major raid from March 1944 until the end of the war. It pioneered long-range fighter escort tactics that became the foundation for American air strategy for the rest of the war and beyond. In the Pacific theater, the P-38 was even more successful. It shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other Allied fighter. It was used for photo reconnaissance, night fighting, ground attack, and long-range interception. The top American ace of World War II, Major Richard Bong with 40 confirmed kills, flew a P-38. The second highest American ace, Major Thomas Maguire with 38 confirmed kills, also flew a P-38. But in Europe, the P-38's greatest contribution wasn't in kills or sorties or tactical innovations. Its greatest contribution was proving, beyond any doubt, that industrial capacity wins wars. The twin-engine configuration wasn't just about performance or survivability. It was about showing the Germans that America could afford to build anything, in any quantity, and there was nothing Germany could do to stop it. Lockheed built 10,037 P-38 Lightnings between 1941 and 1945. Germany built 33,984 Bf-109s and 20,001 Fw-190s during the same period. But Germany was fighting on 3 fronts: the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, the Western Front against Britain and America, and the Mediterranean Front against Allied forces in Italy and North Africa. America was producing 2,000 fighters per month in 1944 and sending most of them to Europe. Germany was producing 1,200 fighters per month and distributing them across 3 fronts, each front requiring reinforcements, each front consuming pilots and aircraft faster than they could be replaced. The math was hopeless. On March 3, 1944, when Gunther Rall stood in the operations room at Wiesbaden Air Base and read the intelligence report about twin-engine fighters escorting bombers, he didn't know all of that yet. But he knew enough. He knew that Germany had lost the air war. He knew that courage and skill and tactical genius couldn't overcome an enemy that produced 5 times more aircraft, trained 10 times more pilots, and had solved every technical problem through sheer industrial might. The P-38 Lightning over Frankfurt was simply the proof. Thank you for watching Iron Front Battles. Please like and subscribe to never miss another forgotten World War II story. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. This is Iron Front Battles.